Before we move to Richland Park, there are some other things that I ought to mention. But I guess since Janet's going to be interviewed too, I'll even go and let her talk about them. We moved out to Richland, and it was a two-bedroom apartment, and we had kids in college by then, and only John was left. Bruce had gone to Amherst, and Beth had gone to Colorado, and Frank had gone to Colorado before Beth had. In fact, we had three kids that went to Colorado. John eventually went there too. When we moved out to Richland Park, we had some unusual experiences. When we first got there, John decided that he wanted a connection to our stereo set in his bedroom, and so he decided he was going to run a wire from the living room around to his bedroom, but he couldn't run it through the house. So he had to run it out a window and then around this two-story apartment building when he had no ladder. But there were little projections in the walls, and all of a sudden he showed a skill that I never saw him have before. He was doing rock climbing on this vertical wall of this apartment building in order to string this wire around from the living room to his bedroom. Jan and I played a lot of tennis, and I played golf as well, and we met a couple who lived in the apartment on the basement level. I guess they have another name for them except basement level. I can't remember what that is, but they were in the military. He was an officer, and he was in a program that the military had to complete their education at university while they were still in the military. And I'm trying to remember the sequence of events, but eventually Bruce went to medical school from Amherst. He went to Washington University for his medical school and took his residencies, because he took two residencies at Harvard. While he was going to Washington, one summer he took a internship. Really, it was an internship, but he went to San Francisco to work with the doctor there that was doing transplants. And that summer, I got a car from Hub Munski, who was in the car auction business, and had sold a car in Seattle, Washington, and I said I would deliver this car if I could drive it. And so my sister and Janet and I and Beth and Frank, we took a trip all through the through Yellowstone National Park and Glacier National Park and the Canadian Glacier National Park, all the way to Vancouver, in this Cadillac that I got from Hub, and then we met, and then from Vancouver we went down to, or no, we met Bruce and a cousin of mine who had flown up from San Francisco, where Bruce was that summer, to meet us in Vancouver. It was in Seattle. It was quite a. It wasn't Vancouver. It was in Seattle. It was quite a trip. And then we flew back from Seattle. Janet and I have taken a lot of trips, and the start of it was going to Acapulco for winter vacations, and we went there 4 years in a row and enjoyed it very much. It was you know, a foreign vacation, and you got away from the cold weather of Omaha. And but after we did it for 4 years, I decided that maybe we ought to start taking foreign trips. And our first foreign trip was in 1960 when I had a dream that I went back to see these friends of ours, the friends of mine that I'd made during the wartime in Derby, England. And I had been corresponding with Bill Blair, the brewery owner, over the years, and he had written me that they were celebrating their 50th anniversary, and I thought if I was ever going to see him again, I ought to go soon, or we ought to go soon. And I woke up that night and I thought, golly, we've got to make that trip. And at about that time, Janet woke up too, and I said, how would you like to make a foreign trip to go to England? And she said, oh, that sounds great. So I borrowed money, and I would shoot one of my kids if they had done this. I borrowed money for the trip, and we took a trip to Europe for 5 weeks. We spent a week in England, and we were in London, and we went up to Derby and up to my old depot, and I had lunch with the Blairs, and I had dinner with the editor of the paper that I befriended, and then he took me out to the old depot where I'd been stationed, and I couldn't even recognize the place because the British had taken it over. From England, we went to France and spent a week in England, and we spent a week in Switzerland, and a week in Italy, and a week in Israel. And that was before there were tours that you could take now. So we had to arrange this trip for just the two of us, and it was considerably more expensive, and because of that fact, than tours that you can take now with a group of people. Subsequently, we've taken a lot of tours. We've been to about 30 countries, and I might talk about a couple of them, not all of them. The year Bruce was married, we went to the wedding in New York when Bruce was interning on Harvard. He met a young lady there, and they became engaged, Maria Krause, and she originally was from New York, and parents, and the wedding was held in New York. And subsequent, after the wedding, Janet and I and Bruce and Frank and Beth went to Washington, where we spent a few days, and I also was inducted into practice in the Supreme Court. And that was the day that the decision was rendered making abortions legal. Can't remember the name of the case now, but that's beyond the point. And after we went through Washington,
Roe and Wade.
Yeah, the case, as you must have caught Janet's voice there, but is Roe versus Wade. But after we went sightseeing all through Washington, the kids went back home to go to school, and Janet and I and my sister took a trip to South America. We went to Argentina, Brazil, and Peru. And in Peru, we met Nancy Ricus, her name was Ricus, but she was married and married to a Peruvian young man. We also, much later, took a trip to Russia, and Shirley Goldstein was instrumental in part of this trip, at least. She was very active in aid to Soviet Jewry, and so she briefed us on what we had to do there, and also provided us with a camera to take in, because each person could take in a camera, so we took one of ours and one for another purpose, which I'll tell you about. And we took in blue jeans, and we got a call from Chicago. We'd been talking with the Soviet committee there just before we left that they needed a pair of large tennis shoes and long johns. And so went out and bought those just before we left. We went to and medicines. We took a lot of medicines, and we went to Washington, where we were briefed again. And just before we left, we got a call from the committee in Chicago that a girl there wanted to see an attorney, and I said, well, have you been talking to her? Yes, and we've sent an attorney in already, and he's coming back actually the day that you are leaving. And I said, well, if that's the case, he's coming back on the same plane that we're going out on, because it makes a round trip, and I'll go to Customs and put his name on a board and see what the story is. And he told me that there was when I met him, as I knew I would, that this couple, there was a couple that had demonstrated. They'd come from another city and demonstrated in Moscow to be let to go to Israel, and they had been arrested, and they wanted to. They sent the wife back to the city they were from and put him in jail, and this woman wanted an attorney to go in and talk to the prosecutor. And when I met this gentleman at Customs, he said he had gone in, and she had wanted him to ask the prosecutor a bunch of questions that they wanted the answer to, and he answered all the questions, but apparently there was something else, and that's why she wanted another attorney. So I said that I would see her when I got to Moscow. And Shirley Goldstein had given us the names and addresses of people to visit. And I asked this fellow, I said, well, did anything happen to you when you were there? And he said, well, we did get stopped on the street by the KGB, and they asked to see my notebook. And he said, well, it's only an appointment book. And so for that reason, I had a notebook as well. But I put things down in code. For example, one of the people's name that I was supposed to meet in, and this is the one that I remember, and his name was Taratuda. And so I put down Gone with the Wind, because the colonial home in Gone with the Wind, the name of it was Tara, and that reminded me that the guy's name was Taratuda. And I put his phone number down with the numbers inverted, so they wouldn't mean anything to anybody that saw them. And we did that with all of the information, because we went to 3 cities, and in each city we saw a refugee. For example, in Moscow, the first night, we went out of the hotel, went to the phone and called this man, and he said he would meet us in the subway. And I said, well, wait for about 45 minutes. I want to go back to the hotel, and I wanted to get this camera to give him. Because the camera, they would sell. As a matter of fact, we went back to his apartment, and I said, well, I couldn't get any money because the exchange was already closed. He said, don't worry, I've got money. So he paid for our fare in the subway. We went back to his apartment. And I told him about meeting this woman who wanted an attorney, and he said, well, I'll get her in tomorrow night. And we went back there the next night, which was the night we were supposed to have our welcoming banquet for the tour. We never got to that. And when I met this woman, she wanted more questions to be answered. But I said, I'm not the right kind of an attorney for that. You need a criminal attorney. And also, I noticed that when I talked to the fellow that came back, he didn't seem to be bothered by the fact that the KGB had stopped them, but his wife was very bothered. And I didn't want Janet to go through that possibility. So when I got back, I had them send in a criminal attorney who was going to Russia. And in each city that we went to, we saw more refugees and left them more merchandise, medicines, and what have you. And that was, besides sightseeing, we had a very unusual trip. Another trip that we took that was among the more interesting ones to other people was a trip to India with the Friendship Force. Friendship Force was a cultural exchange program started, I guess, by President Carter and his wife, or at least they were listed sponsors, and they encouraged it very much because they thought a people-to-people thing would bring peace between countries. And we were going to India, and if you went with the Friendship Force, then you had to prepare for the trip. Every person in the group had to study something about India and bring a report back to the group, and we had meetings where we went over these reports, and so that you didn't go there without any knowledge of the country, completely at least. And when we flew to New Delhi and met at a schoolhouse, and there we met another family that were going to be our hosts. We were going to be in India for 2 weeks, and the first weeks we were to live with the family. And we were, you know, they had to live, pick people who were fairly well established that had homes and so on. And we were very fortunate. The English family that we lived with were owned factories, and they had an apartment in New Delhi, and they had a chauffeur, and they had somebody to wash the dishes and do the cleaning help in the house. And there were 3 brothers and a sister, and in the family of Sham, that's the Indian husband's name, and the wife's name was Ved Sardana, Sham Verdana, Sardana, and each night we went to a different brother's house for dinner. They never ate till about 11 o'clock, and they drank nothing but Red Label Scotch, Johnny Walker Red Label, and I needed some Indian money, and Sham said to Ernie, son, go get Ernie a couple thousand. He said, and I don't want any money for that, because when I come to the United States, you'll give me American money when I'll need it then. I said, fine, if you're coming, then that's okay. And that's the way we worked it. And then we were supposed to go with our tour group to make a trip around New Delhi, and Sham said, no way are you going with the tour group. We're taking you around to see everything in New Delhi, which he did. And then they had one of their factories was in Jagadri, India. And so we traveled by car, but Sham was driving instead of the chauffeur, and he drove like a wild man, incidentally. And drove it up to the factory where they made electrical components, and he had an apartment above the office building of the factory, and he was building a 3 million rupee home for himself on the grounds of the factory. And it was really going to be a beautiful thing with a lot of marble, which was easy to get there. But even then, that's a very expensive home for India. And then we, after we spent the week with them, I do want to mention, they were very unhappy with the fact that they couldn't serve us American food, and because they were vegetarians. And so one night when we were at the factory, he had a friend of his bring in some what he thought was typical American food, and what he brought was slab bacon. Now, slab bacon is a lot of fat, and they didn't know how to prepare it. It was almost raw, and it was almost impossible to eat. In fact, we just managed to cut out the little pieces of meat that were there and discarded the rest. We didn't want to insult him when he went to such a great extreme to provide us with food. Well, for the second week, the group was going to tour India. For example, we were going to the Taj Mahal, and which wasn't more than a couple hours away from New Delhi. But we went down to one of the main roads, and we were supposed to turn down a side road to get there, and there was a soldier stationed there, and he said, I'm sorry, but you can't go down this road because there's fighting. And so we went to the next side road. We wanted to turn there. Soldier there turned us away. And we went to the third road, and there was another soldier, and we kept on going. And finally we had to take a roundabout route to get to the Taj Mahal. In fact, we were going on single rows. One place we came to the road, and there was no bridge. There was a river, and we just drove the bus across the river. It was very shallow. And we went through towns that I'm sure that the people had never seen Americans. And naturally, we had nothing to eat on the bus, and hours had gone by. It was probably 7 hours before since we had to take this circuitous route to go to our destination, and there was nothing. We had pop on the bus, but nothing to eat, and you just couldn't stop any place in India and get something to eat. So our tour guide stopped at a street bazaar and got a bunch of bananas, and that's all we had to eat till we got to the hotel where we were stopping for the night at San Hall. In many other respects, India was tremendously interesting. We went to the river. Their religious river, which has many religious meanings. In fact, they bathe in it to wash away their sins. They have their burial sites there. They would set the man on fire and scatter the ashes in the river, and it was very interesting. The rickshaw and they would, if they could afford it, they would bring, if somebody died in the family, they would bring them to the bank of the river and cremate them there in a ceremonial fire, and the sun would light the fire and then scatter the ashes in the river. Elephant rides and other interesting things, because to go to one castle we had to go up a very unusual road where cars couldn't go or buses, and you rode an elephant up. But that's among the wonderful trips that we took. Then in 1963, Janet decided that John was old enough so that she didn't have to be with him all the time, and she was a graduate dietitian, and she thought she would go back to practice her profession. And Dr. Bieber, who was the head of the county hospital, said he would give her a job. And when she talked to me about it, I said, well, I have a different thought. How would you like to go in and run the business, and I'll go back to practice law? And I think we can do better doing that than we can having me run the business and you be a dietitian. And she said yes, and I said, and we'll do it on a trial basis, and I'll go back to school to see whether I can still practice law as a refresher course. So I went back to Creighton for one semester as a refresher course, and Janet came in to the plant to learn how to operate the plant. And the way we did it, I had a class at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then I would come back to the plant at 10 o'clock and stay, and then I had another 1 o'clock class in the afternoon, and until 3, or 2 classes actually, and then I would come back to the plant and stay until we closed. And that seemed to work out rather well, and Janet, as it turned out, was much better at running the business than I was. And I found that it was much easier to study as an adult for law school than it was to study when I was a young man going to the University of Nebraska. But I went through the semester, and I found that I wanted to practice law. Janet stayed at the plant and ran the plant, but she used to go in about 9:30 in the morning and leave about 2:30. But uh, Janet was better equipped than I was, because if one of the girls who was doing ironing would not show up, she could do it. And not only that, if somebody were running the shirt machine didn't show, Janet learned how to do it. And also, well, of course, I did this too. If the truck driver didn't show up, Janet would get into her car and deliver. And if we could, we'd get a little young fella to run the orders. She'd drive the car, and he'd run the orders for her. So a lot of things she could do that I couldn't do, but there are things that I could do on the engineering and mechanical side that she couldn't. So if we had a problem there, I could always come out and take care of that. And Janet would not work on Saturday, so I would come in on Saturday mornings and check the books. We had a girl that came in extra on Saturday to run the office, and I would come in on Saturday too, check the books, do any mechanical work that have to be done, help with the counter if necessary, until about 2 o'clock or so, and then I'd leave, and the girl would then close up. So that was a great way that it worked out, and the business was actually much more successful with Janet running it than it was than when I was running it. Now, I have to give her credit for being a very capable businesswoman. And so I started practicing law, and I found out that Harry Folks had just left the MUD as a staff attorney and had opened his own office, and that he had an extra office. And so I rented that office from him, and of course, to begin with, my practice was very small, and he had some cases that were left from the time that he was practicing at MUD as a staff attorney. So he was handling them, and occasionally he had other work that would come in that I could take over, and I gradually built a clientele. Of course, one of the I've already mentioned that the coal, sack of coal, and the city clerk. So there's no point in doing it again. But about 1965, Ben Wall came over to talk to us, and he had left his firm and talked to us about setting up a new firm, and we did. And the name of the firm was Folks, Wall and Winthrop. And Ben had already left his firm and didn't have any place to go, and we were going to set up our practice in the executive building, which was a brand new building on 17th and Douglas on the northeast corner. But the building wasn't finished yet, so he put a desk in one corner of the 6th floor and a telephone, and the whole floor was his office. It was the largest single-man office in the city of Omaha until they finished the rest of the floor and put in the partitions, and then Harry and I moved over there with the secretary and our library. Eventually, after a few years, Harry Folks went to California, and the firm then became Wall and Wintrow, and we had extra space, so we rented that out to Kenny Weiner, who had been with the county attorney's office and wanted to go into private practice. And so he rented space from us, and after a couple of years, we took him into the firm, and it became Wall, Wintrow, and Weiner. And unfortunately, after a few more years, Ben Wall unexpectedly passed away, and the firm had grown to a point where we had 5 attorneys and 3 law clerks and secretaries, and but Ben was really the rainmaker. The rainmaker is the fellow that brings in the cases, and when he passed away, why, we didn't need all of the attorneys and all the spaces that we had in the executive building, and so we moved out to Old Mill, and we then officed. We had our firm was still called Wall, Wintrow, and Weiner, but Arnold Stern also had an office in the same place, and we moved from there to the Commercial Federal Building on 72nd Street, and eventually to our last location, 119th and Arbor, where we moved in with 7 other attorneys, although the firm was still Wall, Wintrow, and Weiner. And after I retired in '89, it still remained Wall, Wintrow, and Weiner. But Kenny Weiner is the only one left, and he isn't practicing very much. Probably still goes to the office every day. In my practice, when I first started, naturally, you take any kind of a case that comes in the 70s. I did a lot of discrimination work, race, sex, and age discrimination, and in the 80s, I did mostly estate planning and probate work, because trial work is, and that's what discrimination work involved. Trial work is very difficult. I mean, if you had a 2-week trial or a 3-week trial in federal court, most people would think that, you know, it really is anything. You start in court at 9 o'clock in the morning, and you break for an hour and a half or 2 hours at lunch, and you get off at 4:30. But what they don't realize is that you meet with the judge at 8 o'clock in the morning, because the afternoon before he's told you, I want this principal law briefed, and we will discuss it, and you'll have the briefs ready for me at 8 o'clock in the morning. And when you get back to the office, you've got all those phone calls to answer, and then you have to prepare your witnesses, so you're working until about 12 o'clock the previous night to prepare for the case that's going, and this goes on for 2 or 3 weeks. So in the 80s, I did estate planning and probate work, which is not as requiring physically as trial work. And then in '89, I retired, but of course the plant was going all this time with Janet running it, and during that period, Beth got married. She was living in Colorado and teaching school, and she met a young man there by the name of Tim Schabacher, and we all went there for the wedding, and it was going to be held outside. And of course, we didn't have any facilities there to entertain the way we wanted to. So they had already gotten a little home, and so we had a spread after the wedding out in the yard, and fortunately the weather held. Frank was not so fortunate. When he got married in Cleveland, Margie lived in Cleveland, and Frank had a business there, and they were going to get married outside, but the weather got so bad that we had to move it in. But there was a place in the place where he was living where they could hold the wedding, and afterwards we entertained in a hotel. John got married in Colorado, and we now have 6 grandchildren. Bruce, of course, has the oldest, and she is engaged to be married, and but we don't have any grandchildren who are married yet. The youngest is 3 years old. John got married kind of late in life. He was 40 or 41 before he got married. And our children have been wonderful. Well, we found that, and I'm have to retrogress, I guess. We found that we could live very well in an apartment house that I talked about at Richland Park, and we had looked at condominiums, and we looked at Swanson Towers, and I thought it was a terribly expensive place to live in, but so when the building of Swanson Towers was originally turned into a condominium, although the apartments were then much cheaper, we didn't move there. We stayed in our apartment, but then an apartment on the first floor got empty, and this was a couple of years after they become a condo, and Janet went to look at it, and she said, Ernie, you better come see this apartment. It's the one this condominium, it's the one we need. And so I came. I said, I can't get there till tomorrow morning to make an appointment. So we met the real estate agent in the condo, and actually it looked terrible because the people had not been living in it for a while. The wallpaper was falling off, but you could see the possibilities, and so we made an offer and gave the children of the previous owner who had inherited it, gave them 12 hours till midnight that night to accept the offer, and they did. And so we moved, and that's where we live now, in the condominium where I'm making this tape. I might go back, though, to some of the things in the 60s, when I first opened my law office, actually in 65, or in 62, I became before I opened the office, no, in 63, right. I was a vice president of B'nai B'rith, and the following 2 years later, I'd always been active at Bethel Synagogue. I was chairman of the educational committee, and so I was elected president in 1965 of Bethel Synagogue. And at the same time, B'nai B'rith wanted to become president of B'nai B'rith, and I said there was no way I could do two of those at one time, because the Bethel presidency was for a 2-year period, and that was a lot of work. I used to stop at the synagogue every morning on my way down to work, and there was always something to do there to take care of, from signing checks to taking care of a problem that the rabbi brought up. And almost every night you had a meeting with this or that committee, and you went to services every Friday night, and sometimes on Saturday, and it was a full-time job for 2 years. But I enjoyed it, and I still enjoy going to the synagogue, although certainly I haven't been active for many, many years. One of the things that I did subsequently at the synagogue, there had been a young group of men elected, and they had heard or thought at least that Rabbi Kripke was going to retire. And so they talked to him about retiring it, and they asked him to retire. And he didn't want to retire, and there was a big uproar in the synagogue about that. Arnie Stern was president at the time, and so they were going to have a meeting of the congregation, a public meeting of the congregation about Rabbi Kripke's retirement, and Arnie Stern asked me to chair that meeting. And I knew that was going to be a terribly difficult thing because of the two factions involved. And I took a day off of my practice to plan exactly how that meeting was going to be run. Each side was going to be so many minutes for their preliminary remarks, and each person who wanted to speak extemporaneously, and they were allotted a specific period of time, because I knew that if I let that meeting get out of control, it would be bedlam. And when I called the rabbi and said, "Rabbi, you're going to have 7 minutes for your introductory remarks," he said, "I don't think I can do it." I said, "Rabbi, that's all the time I've got allotted for you." And he called me back and said, "Yes, I can do it." Anyway, that was one of the things that you get involved in your younger years. Of course, in my later years, I haven't been as active in the synagogue as I was then. I was active in the Anti-Defamation Committee and became chairman of that, and served on the Federation Board. From the time that the boys were active in the Boy Scouts, I became active in the Boy Scouts. I was on the troop committee, and then became active on the sectional committee in the city, and eventually was on the local board of the Boy Scouts. And I've been very happy with that work, although I haven't done that for years. I must have been active in the Boy Scouts for 20 or 25 years, but I haven't done much of that. And for a number of years now, Janet and I have been going out to Palm Springs for the winter time. We started going there some 20 years or more ago. We originally went out there for a weekend, for a long weekend, because somebody was having a birthday party out there from Omaha, and they invited us to come. And then we went out for a couple of weeks, and then we went out for a month, and now we're going out for 4 months. It's a substantial part of our lives. We can do that because we sold the Omaha Lace Laundry French Cleaners in 1989, and I retired in that same year, and Janet and I have been retired ever since. Janet, of course, until she started working at the business, was active at the synagogue. She was a vice president there, and probably would have become president of the sisterhood, but when she went over to running the business, she wasn't able to do that as well. So now we're enjoying retirement, and we're in our senior years, and we're enjoying those as well, in adequately good health, and I hope it continues.